Okay, so this is the River Runners Oral History Project, and this is September 18th, 1994, and we're here with Alistair Bleifuss and Ann Cassidy. And God only knows what we're going to get, but we'll just have a little visit and see what we get here out of this deal. What I've been doing with all these people is just asking them for kind of a brief resume of their connection with the canyon. And rivers and stuff, and I think we might as well do that with you guys too, just for starters, if you're into it.
Well, pretty much starting running rivers. I started with OARS, and George went, and still working for him 16 years later. And I met Ann on the river working for George up on Dolores, and I started running rivers in California. It's a long story behind that, but as soon as I came down here, this is the place everybody's aiming for, and I realized it was a place to be, and worked my way into it. And there are a lot of other guides leaving, and learned a lot from Ann on Dolores, and started running some training trips down here. And then the season, it just opened up, and I was able to start running trips. And back then, you needed 3 trips to be a guide, and then 6th trip you could lead it, or maybe after 6. And after my 6th one, I felt I was ready to lead every trip, had my itineraries laid out, and knew everything that was happening down here. And it kind of worked out that way. I started leading a lot of trips real early. I'd been leading trips in California, but just jumped into here, and still doing it. But Ann has a lot better story on coming here.
I first, in 1974, I decided to get involved in politics. This is how my whole river career began. In California, the Stanislaus River was being dammed, and so I thought, well, I'd never been on a river trip. I didn't know about whitewater rivers, but I became the chairman for Marin County and trying to keep the dam from being built and save the Stanislaus. And they were offering trips to VIPs at the time, and you gave your $50 for a 2-day trip, and you went on down, and that was donated to the campaign. So I went with oars on the Stanislaus for 2 days. Loved it. The next year I did the Tuolumne, which is the premier whitewater trip in California. And then I came down the Grand Canyon in 76, and I just loved it. Came back again, paid as a passenger in 77, and figured there had to be some way I could come down without paying money all the time. And I made good friends with the boatmen, and so that was a year of low water down here, and a lot of the motor companies couldn't use their user days. So I called George up, and he said I'd be welcome to be a baggage boatman. So I started in 1977, but he told me I was too small to ever be able to really work as a guide or row a trip. So I did 2 trips that summer. I don't know how many, 4 or 5 the next summer. And then in 79, he offered me my first paid trip as a boatman. And I worked, I guess, did about 65 or 70 trips rowing for oars until 1989, when I found out getting up every morning on all 4s, because my back hurt so bad that I wasn't really enjoying it. And so I kind of retired from commercial river running. About the same time, 1990, GCES started. And I just had such a longing to be back down here that I came down as a cook on the science trips. And it was a real hard adjustment to make from being a boatman, because nobody ever remembers that you were a boatman again. All of a sudden you're a cook, and it's tough.
Yeah, and Ann started, she was pretty much had it with rowing. And so I came down as a cook too, and cooking for these scientists, and learned how to run motor rigs, and then got into that. And so Ann and I were able to come down here on science trips a lot and work as a team and be together in the canyon. And my first motor rig trip, Whale would let me run his boat around the river, and Ray Pope and some other guys would give me a couple little pointers. But the first trip was with Brian Durker, and we went up there and rigged the boat and shoved out from the ferry and got out there above the Priya, and Brian just kind of looks at me and says, well, your turn to learn, it's your boat, and he pretty much let me run everything and make a lot of mistakes, mainly just on the pull-ins and that, but I think that's, I knew the river is just figuring out how to get a motor rig down it, and Brian was great by just saying, it's, run the river. And so I got my 3 training trips in on running motor rigs and knew something about them. Still scared to death about running them, because you got a big boat, motor, things happen. You know, a rowing rig, I'm just so much more comfortable in it. And later that summer, Ann and I got our first trip, and it was started off going upstream above Lee's Ferry, and then, you know, ran on down doing one of those beach survey trips on 5,000, and I think a broke a motor handle going upstream, just kind of torquing on it, and then got a new motor at Lee's Ferry, and when we went below there, all of a sudden started having gas problems. Had all these gas tanks we got from Tom Workman out in his shed, and they'd been sitting in the rain, and everything pretty much had water sitting at the bottom of the gas, and we ended up floating aimlessly, learning a lot about mechanics and rivers. And this was about September 15th, so we went below Lee's Ferry on the last day of motor season. So we'd kind of left with a horde of the motor rigs. Last one's coming down, but oftentimes we were the last motor in line, and
With no
well,
motor.
right below, we made it through Priya, and every trip I'm always glad to make it through Priya Riffle with 2 motors. And then Badger kind of lost a bit of a prop in there, and then after Badger started having gear problems and carburetor problems.
Lost the lower unit.
Well, I think that was another trip. But by North Canyon, we'd caught up with a couple of the motor trips, and our scientists also hadn't brought all their maps and photos and stuff they were going to be doing, so they didn't know exactly how they were going to be working. But some of them had been down before, and they kind of winged it and set up some new sites. So we were never really behind schedule because they didn't have the material they needed to work with anyways. So we could spend time on cleaning out the gas lines. And, you know, of course, with bad gas, I got it in one gas line, so I switched gas lines and got it all the other gas line gunked up, and the plunger, the pumps, and the filters, and didn't have enough spare filters, and, you know, didn't need a filter with that much water in there anyways.
It's pretty helpless after doing so many rowing trips to
Well-
have no motor and just be floating aimlessly.
What cracks me up is I started as a motorboatman, and I used to feel like we got no respect from anybody that was rowing. They used to think, oh, those guys, those boats are easy.
No,
Boy,
they're both equally hard, and motor maybe more. It's maybe what you start with that you always have maybe those better instincts with.
I feel like sometimes motors, especially in low water, are less forgiving than
And-
any.
Yeah. Well, like in Dubendorf, this trip I was going to do the straight ahead run, and it wasn't quite where I wanted to be, so I turned it around and then started on those tail waves there. I'd kind of gotten my turnaround was slow, so I was kind of off there towards that eddy on the right side that TA had told me you'd ended up in, or he'd ended up in.
No, I did it. I drove it
And,
up on shore there.
Well, you didn't drive it up on shore, but you're up in the eddy, and he'd always told me how impressed he was with your getting that boat out of there, and you know. And so, you know, I figured that was the eddy you were in. I never was really sure which one it was, but I could kind of see how you'd end right up in there.
Well, that's a long story that we don't need to get into now, but I drove that. I parked the boat on shore on that eddy, and it was like February 5th, and nobody else was down there. It was me and TA on this boat, and TA was in a raving, he'd been raving about that gay trip. Remember the one, the one I'm talking about, the one where
There've been many of them.
well, there was this one where these guys had AIDS and stuff.
Oh, that
And
one.
I was like, God, don't let me be stuck here with TA.
There's
Going
nobody
on
that can
about this.
rave.
We have got to get out of here. But he did really good driving the boat
Yeah.
then. Oh, okay. How's that? Better? Below knee level, huh? So you guys started doing science in 89?
90.
And do you still do commercial trips, or have you just mainly been
Yeah,
doing?
for several years there I was just about totally science, running the motors and doing the science when you're on a different schedule. It was a lot of fun, and I was doing over 200 days a year down here every month of the year, and Ann was putting in 150 days. And last couple years I've gone back to kind of the 50-50. It's the folks coming down here kind of changed. It used to be the adventurers, and then for a while it was kind of the fad thing to do. And then the last several years I noticed it's a big getaway. They're not having to answer the phone, go to work. they're away from the pressure, they're really enjoying themselves down here, and they're enjoying the canyon. For a while they're more nitpicking at what was, you know, the food, the camping, the toilet, and all that stuff wasn't quite what they expected. But these last couple years, you're with people who are having the best time in their lives, and helping them have it, and you know, you're spreading, you know, they're taking that out there with them, whatever they do. So.
You said something today. You were wanting us. You said to me that I ought to make sure and get everybody's reaction right after they run Lava Falls, which we didn't do. But what made you think of that, of getting that, and what's that all about for you? Why is that? What happens there?
Because you know, Lava Falls, it's not always the biggest rapid on the river. It's not always the biggest ride, the wildest, but it's kind of always there, and it has a name for it. And I know boatmen always gear up for it. Rig their boats a little tighter, spend a little extra time with it, worry about it a little bit more, and maybe especially in a rowing boat, if you're sitting up right in the front of that thing and entering that rapid, those waves are hitting you hard. You're feeling the force of the river. When you're scouting it, you can hear the sound, but when you're riding through the rapid in the boat, you don't hear anything. You don't hear the sound of the water. It's all eyeball. And you know, I've just seen, you know, I know how I feel when I get down the bottom, and I've seen people too, and the water streaming off them, and you know, they're not thinking about anything except how great they feel, and what a great ride they've had. And I think just to, you know, you always see things on films of river trips, they're always showing boats going through and getting the big ride and that, but I think it's good to, you know, it's not about the boat getting through, it's about what the people are getting out of that run down there.
I wonder what it is. I wonder what it is that's so...
Well, you had a pretty big smile there, too. Martin wasn't smiling, you know, he was kind of, well, but the boat did it. That's what we always, you know, we're at the bottom now.
What'd you expect?
Yeah.
I was really glad that he hit
but,
that slot.
You know, and we were down there pulled in on the left, and we were seeing everybody come by, and Brad and the cataract boat, and just their faces. And, you know, when I run rapids, I like being the first boat through and just kind of looking at the water and reading it and doing your run out of it. It's sometimes helpful to watch other boats go through and maybe learn a little bit for it, but I think you're a little sharper if you're kind of looking at it and picking your route. And so, you know, a lot of times I've, you know, run through in first groups if you're running in two groups, or down below rapids to watch other people's runs, and then you see their boats coming through, and you're seeing their people's reactions as well as, you know, feeling what the people in your boat felt, and, you know, being right there with them.
How are we doing? Are we okay on light?
We got about 5 minutes.
It'd be nice to sit with you guys for a little bit longer. Are you on cook duty in the morning, or
Me?
can we
Yeah,
bring
always
you?
is.
I'm always.
Well, can
but
we?
we could figure out something.
That would be good.
We're right
It's hot
after.
cereal and cereal. We can get it done
Yeah.
by 6,
Yeah.
6:15, and then jump out for a bit, and Kent and Diane kind of serve it, whatever, and then those guys can get going, and then we'll go clean it up, and Brad can come down and talk to you, something like that.
Are we rolling? Well, tell me about. I think you. What's your philosophy on leading a trip? I mean, I
Leading?
think you've done a hell of a job on this one. And
I don't know. It's I mean, I know when you're leading, you always have a lot more things going through your mind. You know, Ann's in charge of the food this trip, so I'm not worrying about that. But you're not just thinking for yourself or a few people. You try to think for everybody. And Mark Jensen always kind of put it pretty well. You know, he was on a trip where everybody was a leader. And, you know, running trips for OARS, we like everybody to start leading trips as soon as they can. You know, it's not a seniority thing. As soon as you're a competent boatman, get out there and lead a trip, because you learn so much more by leading it instead of just following. And Mark Jensen said that anybody can be a leader down here. It's a lot harder to be a follower. And that's kind of true. You know, if you're just following, you're not really making decisions, feeling them, you can let things slide. When you're leading, you feel it a lot more. You feel a lot more responsible for it. And I don't know, you gotta always kind of just take care of that weakest part of your trip, not necessarily the whiner, complainer, but somebody is maybe a little bit left out or not enjoying themselves as much, having a harder time of it, start taking care of them, gearing the trip for them, they're going to start enjoying it, and other people are going to enjoy it anyways. I don't know, Ann's led a lot of trips, and I think as a woman it's probably harder to lead trips and have, guys listening and passengers listen to what she said.
I think that's true. I led a lot of trips in the early 80s when there weren't as many women rowing, and I think I'd sometimes make good decision, and the boatmen would just go ahead and do what they wanted to do. And that's something that over the years has changed, and I think it's just with experience with all of us, as Alistair was saying, is that you have to be a good follower. Big Bruce was always great. When you led a trip, if you ask him a question, he'd answer it, or an opinion. But if you said, we're going to, camp here, he'd say, fine. I told the passengers and everybody where we were camping before, and had some of the boatmen stop and unload somewhere else. So I never really liked leading trips. I did a whole lot of them for a while, and then I just said I just as soon not do them. I got to be a better follower. It's the same thing in the kitchen or rowing boats. You get so, if you have to pack the box a certain way or you have to chop the little veg, there's people that are in charge that say that. And when you learn to be a good leader, then you let people that have experience do things their way, and they respect you for it, and you become also a good follower. And I was kind of picky before too, and I used to let it bother me. And now I probably could lead trips real well now, but at the time I just would always resent when I'd make an announcement and it would get overruled. And it was.
Well, talk about picky, not that you're picky, but you always have. Ann developed so many best ways of doing things, in good ways, and she's very efficient. That she sees things, and that's kind of why we get along on the river most of the time pretty well. We see things kind of the same ways. I'm not as quick as I used to be about it, but what has to be done now, we just really picked up on it, and I learned a lot of that from Ann. And a lot of the river trip is actually the camp and the kitchen and taking care of that stuff, getting everything set up. It's not just like Martin always says, well, the boat did it, and yeah, Martin's boat's been down before, all our boats been down before. They know the river, and logs float down it with no problem. But it's kind of running the camp so people are comfortable in there, so the crew is comfortable there too. I always figure on a river trip, I try to work the hardest there and do the most work, and every now and then I get outworked by somebody, in my opinion, of course, but if you try to work harder than anybody else, everybody doesn't have to work too hard. And you always realize if some other crew member is kind of taking some shortcuts and taking it easy and spending more time fiddling with her gear or doing something a little superfluous instead of maybe what really needs to get done now. And
or not paying attention to the passengers. My favorite part of a river trip was the people. I just love sitting in the boat all day talking to people. And sometimes we'd see, like you're talking, boatmen that would forget to get off the boats at night and not watch out. Yeah. And that's another.
And another
thing.
trick I think to getting the work done down here is just to do the job you feel least like doing almost. The dirtiest job, cleaning out the cans, smashing the cans. Just go ahead and do that stuff because nobody else wants cleaning that funky Dutch oven. Go ahead and do that because nobody else wants to do it either. And if you get that done, everything else gets done. You're on the river and running the river.
Okay, I guess we're too dark.
Yeah, makes me
but
laugh.
I'm afraid they're going to say something good that's just...
Yeah. So where were we? What were we talking about last night?
Well, we've kind of gone through leadership
trips.
and that, and then I don't know. Then talking about these people, they almost really don't need much of a leader. They just need someone to tell them where they're going and not really what to do because they're all pretty good campers. They get their camps together.
Take care of themselves pretty much.
They're up early, getting their bags packed and brought back down, falling around a little bit, but no more than anybody else. And they just, it doesn't bother them. They're going strong for.
Well, how did you encounter this trip? Like, when did you find out it was going on, and when did you guys find out you were going to be a part of it, and what was your first reaction to that?
Well, been trying to work with Mike Walker to get on a science motor trip in September, starting way back in June, and Ann and I had to run a trip together, and so it was hard to get a schedule definite then. But end of July, I sat down, looked at the schedule with Mike, and he didn't have Ann down, so we were trying to piece together how we could do it, and I saw this trip was together, and didn't really know much about it, but I thought I'd enjoy it, and I thought Ann would enjoy it too, because she likes people, and these are some special people. And so kind of worked it with Mike and some other stuff so we could get on this trip without really knowing much about it. And then later on we found out more of the details, and it maybe didn't look quite so good. One of those details being that the number of people, and being in charge of the food, numbers grew from 28 to 35, and it's not all that fun to come down and cook every night and every morning for that many people.
When you get the same pay for 3 people.
Yeah.
And been on trips with 8 people where I had an assistant. So, but it also worked out. I found out I had another tour. We were originally going to do another trip that I think went over and past the 1st of October. And that was all sort of in the planning stages, and I found out I was lucky enough to be going to Tibet in October. So I wanted to be sure to have one that finished and gave me a few days at least at home before I left for that. And this one, I think when we first knew about it, we were real interested, as Alistair was saying, but we didn't know the exact dates. So it turned out that it was perfect timing in addition. And we didn't know till, I don't know, a week before who really was on it. We thought maybe Lois Jotter's daughter was coming. We had no idea about some of these people at all. So it was, it was real thrilling and exciting and more interesting. And we didn't know, and I'm sure it was the week before when we talked to Diane, really who was coming, what the trip was about, other than that it was an old-timer trip and some early Colorado River runners. And of course, we both bought every book in the world that we find on Grand Canyon and the Colorado River, so we knew that part would be great.
And how has it been? How's it felt to be messing around with these guys? And do you have, are there things that stick out in your mind right now about some of these people? What things? What do you think you'll remember the most about this thing down the road somewhere?
Oh, just their stories and how, to me, they're mainly in their 70s, and the wonderful things that they did down here, and us trying just to get a feel for what it was like, not knowing what was around the corner, and how their trips went, and even if they hadn't done this, they'd all be interesting people. And that I find real special. Even if, we meet them on the street, every one of them I would like, and I find them interesting, besides having this background that we all have together. I haven't met, there's not a person there's nobody here that has spoiled a minute of the trip. Yeah. When you get 35 people together, there's usually a few spoilers. They get lost in the crowd because it's so big. Everybody's special.
I think their enthusiasm's been something else. They're talking and laughing, enjoying it, and I don't know, just see them come back here. I think they're really starting to, kind of having a chance to maybe live a little bit of their past and really think about some of the adventures and good times they had when they were younger.
I don't think they're letting their limitations slow them down either. I think they just realize that, and are doing the best they can with what they have. And that's nice.
You look at Les Jones out there, he'll rig the whole boat for you and unload it and wade out in the water and set up the whole kitchen. You got to keep an eye on him because he'll work too hard and do too much, but he's all over the boat. They all found, I like Kent Frost he found his little seat back there in Brian's motor well, and he can look out over the crowd and see the boat and where it's going and keep an eye on everybody, and feels real comfortable back there. And
he takes care of little things. He always coils the rope right. They're busy. They're so.
Who else does some of that special kind of stuff? It's neat to get you guys to give your observations about what each person does is kind of special.
And Tad, we were lucky enough. We haven't had a chance to ride with people as much and talk to people because we're busy. But Tad's gone with us a couple of times when we've done the photo reshoots, and his enthusiasm is wonderful. And he's just as sharp as a tack. You know, he has trouble getting to camp and setting up and taking down, and he needs some help with that. But he remembers things, and he's got a great sense of humor, and he's got an eye. I mean, he's just, I really enjoyed talking to him. I sat one day and I didn't want the day to end because we were just, you know, sitting there on the boat floating down, seeing things, talking, telling me his history. He's a very interesting man. He's done a lot of things.
I think Lois's strength and just her
Wow.
good humor, you know, she's real sharp, you know, perceptive, witty, and you know, she's kind of my hero of this trip in a lot of ways.
Did you hear why she never came on another trip? I didn't read the history so much, but she's gotten a lot, like in David Lavender's book. They put her down as being the agitator on Norm Neville's trip, and she was real hurt by all that, and she never really wanted to do another river trip after she left until she heard about this one, and she was a little defensive when she came. I mean, it's just, you can't believe that she'd be the agitator, and she'd be the one that didn't do her job, and she just is. She took when she signed my book, she made corrections on that book and all the mistakes that he made in the history of their trip.
Is that Lavender's book?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another amazing
is great.
person is Bob Riggs too, because that guy, his energy, you wouldn't believe he's whatever 63 or whatever, because he's a
Fireball.
younger, you know, has more energy than I do or any of the crew, and he's helping all the time. He's been so gracious about his boat, letting other people row it, not really wanting to be there all the time or, you know, take command of it, and you know, just
We were trying to
for
figure
knowing,
out.
being a good river runner, knowing so much about it, he's pretty humble about it too.
Yeah.
He doesn't try to push it in on anybody or that. And he's enjoyed running the big motor rigs. He's pretty smooth with that. Just kind of follows that nose down the river. You know, he has a lot of motor experience down here in the fast boats.
After the first day, we were all trying to figure out, not all, Diane and I, his fountain of youth, because, I mean, he just looks so young. And then he said it came up, we were having halibut that first night, and he said, it's all I eat, halibut and tomatoes and lemons. So if anybody's interested, fish. I guess fish, tomatoes, and lemons. That's all you need.
Come down with the mic.
Oh, sorry. Well, when you get right down to it, I wonder could you put your finger on what's been the best part of this trip?
You mean a moment, or do you mean?
Yeah, well, just in general, what do you think you're going to remember the very most about it, if anything?
Well, Kent Frost talked. That's one
I
thing.
think, yeah, Ken Frost's story there about his
Oh.
working his way down the river and walking home. Just the way he told it, and you know, he's real soft-spoken, but he knew he was talking to a group there, and he raised his voice, and you know, he just had those jokes in there, and I think just the way he made that river trip happen is kind of the spirit of a lot of these people. They wanted to do something, they just, you know, went out and did it, and you know, and
Didn't worry about
yeah,
anything.
made it go, and it's almost kind of a microcosm of Martin in some ways. That, you know, he kind of had his little mission with rivers and running boats, and you know, stuck with it and took it to bigger things, and you know, not just the river but the environment around the river and the people who enjoy those places. And these are all real, you know, strong-willed, purposeful people who they're not going to be stopped by, you know, lack of money or physical.
Well, and Woody and Sandy, that's another inspiration to me. Hearing their story, and to have I mean, he's like a bionic human at this point. He's going in this fall for 2 knees, and I don't know if he has both hips done already. But they've done so many things, and they enjoy. You know, he has a hard time getting around now, and how much they enjoy each other. I've really loved hearing about them.
I missed that part. When you say their story, what?
Well, she'd been married before, I think young, and they refer to her ex-husband as John the Bastard. instead of John the Baptist. And
Oh, boy.
she was working at Marble Canyon, managing it, and had 3 kids and met Woody. He was a river ranger there. And, I mean, they've been everywhere. They've hiked every canyon that I've ever thought of. And they got married soon after, and I don't know, they've lived together 30-some years, raised the kids. But they've done so much. And as I look, I mean, you talk about a place, and they've been there. And they've done it, and they're still keeping their sense of humor, and he has such a hard time getting around. But he was actually retired from the LAPD before he worked at Lake Powell, and then became a Lee's Ferry river runner, or a river ranger. But every time I talk to them, they've been somewhere else and done something, and they have such a joy in each other that it's great. There's just little bits about everybody, you know?
Actually, kind of one of the strongest feelings I've had on this trip was that first day at the reception. We'd gone up and rigged the boats and come back. We're going to meet the people at the Klein Library. When I walked in, just right in the hall, there was Bob Euler coming down. And I hadn't seen him for years, sent some Christmas cards and kept in touch. But just to see him, and it, just felt so good. And I don't know, he, taught me a lot about this place. And just, I think to realize that those people are still out there doing things and in touch, it just, there's such a feeling to see him there that, I think these other people, they've kind of grown, added to that, What am I saying?
You think you're saying it quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was.
I thought it was cool that Don Harris came down.
Yeah.
And Don,
I didn't know about him.
didn't know him, and
Just knew the name. So.
And after seeing those films of him rowing the boat as a young man, he's pretty slick at the sticks. Came out, and Harvey.
Oh, getting to talk a little to Harvey.
Yeah. Well, we should do that. We definitely should. We didn't.
Yeah.
We didn't get
And to have him, 87 years old, drive up from Sun City to Lee's Ferry to see us off, all by himself. And he, when he got tired, he just put a little shirt over his face and fell asleep in the sun for a while. I mean, and he'd have liked to have come, but I think he and Don and Bob they just didn't want to be a burden.